Hi everyone. I've been lurking in this family relationship subreddit for a while, but I guess it's finally my turn to share something that's been sitting heavy on my chest for years. I'm writing about my life, or more specifically, about what it feels like to grow up as the backup child. I'm 26 now, but the story really starts long before I could even understand what was happening. From what my grandmother told me, and from the way my parents still talk, it was clear that my older brother was always the golden one. The one destined for success, the one everyone believed would achieve big things. When I was born, instead of excitement, there was this quiet disappointment. Not something anyone said directly to my face as a baby, obviously, but something that lived in small comments, comparisons, and expectations that followed me my entire childhood. Family photos told the story without words. My brother in the center, proud smiles, big plans talked about openly. Me, often on the side, included but never really celebrated. My parents would talk about his future like it was already written. He's going to do amazing things. When it came to me, the tone was different. She'll figure something out. I grew up hearing those kinds of phrases so often that they started to feel normal, even though they slowly chipped away at my sense of worth. The unfairness wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was subtle. Fewer celebrations for my achievements, less patience when I struggled, and constant reminders that I should be more like my brother. My grandmother was the only person who noticed how deeply it affected me. She was the one who hugged me longer, who asked real questions about my dreams, who told me that I mattered even when the rest of the house made me feel invisible. Back then I didn't have the words for it. I just felt secondary. Like my role in the family was to support the story they were writing about someone else. And as I got older, that quiet unfairness turned into something much louder. Especially when my parents started openly comparing us in ways that slowly crushed my self-esteem. As I grew older, the favoritism stopped being subtle. It turned into open comparisons that followed me everywhere. At home, at family gatherings, even during casual dinners. My parents didn't just praise my brother. They measured me against him constantly. And no matter what I did, I always came up short in their eyes. If I brought home good grades, the response was usually something like, "That's nice, but your brother never had to study this hard." If I struggled with something, it became proof that I wasn't as capable. Every success of mine somehow turned into another reminder that I wasn't the child they believed would go far. Over time, it started eating away at my confidence. I began to second-guess everything, my decisions, my talents, even my personality. I stopped sharing my achievements because I already knew the reaction I'd get. Instead of feeling proud, I felt anxious, waiting for the next comparison or sarcastic comment. Family gatherings were especially tough. My parents would tell relatives about my brother's potential, big dreams, big plans, endless praise. When it was my turn, the tone shifted. "She's doing okay." Those small pauses, those half-hearted smiles, they stayed with me longer than anyone probably realized. What hurt the most was that I genuinely wanted their approval. I worked harder, tried to be more helpful, more responsible, hoping one day they'd look at me the same way they looked at him. But the harder I tried, the more invisible I felt. The only person who noticed how much it was affecting me was my grandmother. She would quietly remind me that comparisons don't define who you are. Back then, I didn't fully believe her. But those words would later become more important than I could ever imagine. Because eventually, I reached a point where I realized I couldn't keep living for their approval. And that realization pushed me toward a completely different path. Things really started to change when I finished high school and had to decide what to do next. My parents were fully focused on my brother's future. Expensive courses, big expectations, constant talk about how he was going to achieve something incredible. When it came to me, there wasn't much discussion. The assumption was simple. I'd figure something out on my own. But I had one person in my corner, my grandmother. She saw how hard I worked despite everything and believed in me long before I believed in myself. When I got accepted into a prestigious university, she was the first person I called. I still remember her voice. Proud, emotional, and genuinely happy for me. And when my parents hesitated about supporting my education, she made a decision that changed my life. She offered to help pay for my studies. Moving away for university felt like stepping into another world. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who didn't compare me to my brother, people who saw me as my own person. It was scary at first. I carried years of self-doubt with me, always expecting to be the second choice. But slowly, through hard work and long nights studying, I started building something that belonged entirely to me. My parents' reactions were mixed. They congratulated me publicly but privately reminded me not to expect too much from life. Meanwhile, my brother was still being treated like the future success story of the family. Even from afar, the comparisons didn't fully stop, but distance gave me space to grow stronger. University wasn't easy, but it was the first place where my efforts were recognized without being overshadowed. I made friends, gained confidence, and started to realize that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the backup child they always believed I was. And after graduation, something unexpected happened. The real world turned out to be kinder to me than my own home ever had been. After graduation, I was honestly terrified. I had a good degree, strong recommendations, and skills I worked incredibly hard for. But years of being told I was second best still echoed in my head. I kept expecting rejection, expecting someone to tell me I wasn't enough. Instead, things started going right. I landed a job at a company that valued teamwork and growth. My first week felt surreal. People listened when I spoke, my manager gave constructive feedback instead of criticism, and my coworkers actually celebrated each other's wins. It took me months to stop waiting for the hidden insult or comparison that never came. Slowly, I began to find my rhythm. I worked hard, asked questions, stayed late when needed, not to prove something to my parents anymore, but because I genuinely wanted to grow. My confidence started building naturally. Small achievements turned into bigger responsibilities, and before long I was trusted with projects that truly mattered. What surprised me most was how supportive my environment was. My team encouraged each other, my boss recognized effort openly, and for the first time in my life I felt seen for who I was, not compared to someone else. I made real friends at work, people who respected me and valued my perspective. Of course, my parents still framed everything differently when talking to relatives. They'd mention my job casually but continued to talk about my brother's future potential, like it was a guaranteed success story. I learned to let that go, or at least pretend it didn't hurt, because for the first time ever I was building a life on my own terms. And as my confidence grew, so did my financial independence, something that would soon lead to one of the biggest milestones of my life. A couple of years into my job, something shifted inside me. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was building stability. Promotions came slowly but steadily, my savings started growing, and for the first time I allowed myself to think long-term. Not just about career goals, but about having a place that truly felt like mine. The idea of owning a home felt almost unreal at first. Growing up, I'd been made to feel like I was always one step behind, like big achievements belonged to my brother's future, not mine. Even when my bank account said I was ready to take the next step, my confidence lagged behind. I kept double-checking everything. Finances, contracts, advice from trusted coworkers who had gone through the same process. And then, I did it. I bought a modest but beautiful house. Nothing flashy, just a warm, peaceful space with big windows and a small garden where I could finally breathe. Signing those papers felt surreal. I remember sitting alone on the living room floor on my first night there, surrounded by boxes, feeling both proud and strangely emotional. It was the first place in my life where I didn't feel like a guest or an afterthought. My grandmother cried when she saw it. She told me she always knew I'd build something meaningful for myself, and hearing that meant more than any congratulations from anyone else. My coworkers threw a small housewarming party, and for once I felt fully supported, fully seen. My parents' reaction was complicated. Publicly they praised me and shared photos with relatives, but privately the tone felt distant. The conversation often drifted back to my brother, how he was just finding his path, how his big success was still ahead. I tried not to let it affect me. After all, this house wasn't about proving anything to them. It was about creating a safe space for myself. But while my life was moving forward, my brother's path was heading in a very different direction. And soon that contrast would start shaking the fragile balance in our family. While my life was slowly becoming more stable, my brother's story, the one my parents always believed would be brilliant, started to fall apart. First it was small things. Dropped courses, missed opportunities, plans that changed every few months. My parents kept insisting it was just a temporary setback, that big success takes time. But eventually the reality became impossible to ignore. Jobs didn't last. Projects were left unfinished. Debt started piling up. Instead of building independence, he moved back in with my parents, and slowly they began supporting him completely. Emotionally, financially, in every way. The strange part was how the narrative never changed. Even when things clearly weren't going well, my parents still talked about him like he was destined for greatness, just misunderstood or unlucky. Meanwhile, my achievements were treated as something expected, almost ordinary. The golden image they had of him never really cracked. Family conversations grew tense. My parents started sounding tired and stressed, but they rarely held him accountable. Instead, they worked harder to protect his image, sometimes by downplaying what was actually happening. I felt a mix of emotions. Sympathy for him as a person struggling, frustration at the unfair expectations, and a strange guilt for doing well when he wasn't. When my brother first visited my new home, I could sense something had changed in him. He walked around quietly, asking questions about my job and finances in a tone that felt off. Not openly hostile, just tense. I tried to be supportive to show that I still cared about him as my sibling. But I didn't realize that seeing my progress would trigger something much darker. Because instead of rebuilding his own path, he made a decision that almost destroyed everything I had worked so hard to create. At first, I didn't even realize anything was wrong. Work felt a little colder than usual. A few coworkers seemed distant, my manager asked more careful questions during meetings, and messages that used to be friendly became strangely formal. I thought maybe I was overthinking it. Until one afternoon my supervisor asked to speak with me privately. The conversation hit me like a wall. I was told that certain rumors about me had been circulating, serious ones that questioned my professionalism and honesty. Hearing it felt unreal, like someone had swapped my life with a stranger's story. I left that meeting shaking, confused about where any of it had come from. Then a friend from work showed me messages that were being quietly passed around. The stories were twisted versions of my life, exaggerations, outright lies, things designed to make me look untrustworthy. And the worst part? I eventually found out that the source traced back to my own brother. Apparently, after seeing my home and hearing about my success, he had started telling people that I cut corners to get ahead, and that my achievements weren't real. Through mutual contacts and social circles, those rumors slowly reached people connected to my workplace. What began as gossip quickly turned into something that threatened everything I had built. I felt sick, not just from the professional risk but from the betrayal. My home, my job, my reputation, things I fought so hard for, suddenly felt fragile. I barely slept during those weeks, constantly worrying that I might lose everything because of lies I never saw coming. Even my parents' reaction hurt. Instead of immediately supporting me, they asked if there was any truth to what was being said. That question alone made me feel more alone than ever. For a moment, it seemed like everything was about to collapse. My job was under review, my professional image was at risk, and I feared losing the home that represented my independence. But deep down, I knew I couldn't let years of work disappear because of someone else's jealousy. So instead of giving up, I decided to fight for the truth. Those weeks were some of the hardest in my life, but they were also the moment I realized how strong I'd actually become. Instead of panicking or running away, I decided to face everything head-on. I gathered every piece of proof I could. Work records, emails, project reports, performance reviews. Anything that showed the real story of how I had built my career. My manager gave me a chance to explain my side, and for the first time since the rumors started, I felt someone was truly listening. I spoke honestly, not defensively, and showed clear evidence that contradicted the false claims. It wasn't easy. Every meeting felt like walking into a storm, but slowly the truth started to cut through the noise. At the same time, I had to deal with the emotional side of things. Walking into the office felt heavy at first, knowing people had heard lies about me. But instead of isolating myself, I stayed consistent, professional, calm, focused on my work. A few close colleagues quietly showed support, reminding me that my real reputation had been built over years, not rumors spread in weeks. Eventually, the company completed its internal review. The conclusion was clear. The accusations had no real foundation. I wasn't just cleared. My work was publicly recognized during a team meeting, which helped rebuild trust and stability. That moment felt like a breath of air after being underwater for too long. The rumors didn't just disappear overnight, but the truth had weight. My job was secure. My professional name was restored. And most importantly, I realized that I could stand up for myself even when things felt overwhelmingly unfair. But while things were stabilizing at work, a new conflict was about to explode at home. Because once my parents saw that I had survived and was still successful, their expectations toward me shifted in a way I never saw coming. Not long after everything at work finally calmed down, my parents' attitude toward me changed, and not in the way I had secretly hoped for. I thought maybe, after seeing how hard I fought to protect my career and home, they'd finally respect me more. Instead, they began to look at me as a solution to my brother's problems. First it sounded harmless. Small comments like, "You're doing so well now," or "Family should support each other." Then the conversations became more direct. They started asking about my salary, my savings, and how much my mortgage cost. Questions they had never shown real interest in before. I felt uneasy, but I tried to stay polite. Eventually, the real request came out. They wanted me to help financially support my brother, not temporarily, but in a way that sounded ongoing. They explained that he was struggling and that, since I had a stable job in my own house, it was only fair for me to help carry the burden. Hearing that left me frozen. Part of me understood wanting to help family. I wasn't heartless. But another part of me remembered everything. The years of unfair comparisons, the rumors that nearly destroyed my career, the lack of support when I needed it most. And now I was being asked to sacrifice my hard-earned stability for someone who had actively tried to harm me. When I hesitated, the tone shifted quickly. They began framing it like an obligation, saying that successful children should give back, that I owed something to the family. I felt the old pressure creeping back in, that familiar feeling of being responsible for everyone else's expectations. Inside, I knew I was standing at another crossroads. Saying yes would mean ignoring my own boundaries. Saying no could fracture what little relationship we had left. And after days of thinking, I made a decision that shocked them, and changed everything again. When I finally sat down with my parents to talk, my hands were shaking. Not because I doubted my decision, but because I knew what was coming. I had spent days thinking it through, weighing guilt against self-respect. And in the end I realized something important. Helping someone who had tried to destroy my life wasn't support. It was self-betrayal. So I told them calmly that I couldn't financially support my brother. I explained that I had worked incredibly hard to build my stability, that I had my own responsibilities, and that after everything that had happened I needed to protect my future first. I tried to keep my tone respectful and clear. The reaction was immediate and intense. My parents said I was selfish. They accused me of forgetting where I came from. My mother said that success had made me cold, while my father questioned my values entirely. The word ungrateful came up again and again, as if refusing to sacrifice my life automatically erased every effort I had made to stay connected to the family. They reminded me of every small thing they had ever done for me, even though most of my biggest opportunities had come from my grandmother's support and my own work. It felt like my entire identity was being reduced to one decision, a decision they refused to understand. I stayed calm, but inside I felt a deep mix of sadness and clarity. For the first time, I didn't try to argue endlessly or prove my worth. I simply repeated that my answer was no, not out of cruelty, but out of self-respect and the need to maintain healthy boundaries. That conversation left a heavy silence between us. I drove back home feeling exhausted, questioning whether I had just broken my family apart. But deep down there was also a quiet sense of strength, the realization that I had finally chosen myself without apology. And just when it felt like the conflict couldn't get any worse, someone unexpected stepped in and changed the entire dynamic of the situation. A few days after that explosive conversation, I got a call from my grandmother. Her voice was calm but serious, the kind of calm that told me she already knew everything. Apparently my parents had reached out to her, hoping she would convince me to change my mind and financially support my brother. Instead, she invited all of us to sit down together. I was nervous walking into that meeting. Growing up, my grandmother had always been gentle and quiet, but that day she carried a different kind of energy, steady, firm, and completely unafraid. She listened to my parents explain their side first. They talked about family duty, loyalty, and how disappointed they were in me for refusing to help. When it was my turn, I simply told the truth, about the comparisons, the rumors, the years of feeling like the backup child, and the work I had done alone to build my life. I didn't exaggerate. I just spoke honestly. And then my grandmother did something I'll never forget. She looked at my parents and calmly said that they had never given me the same support they gave my brother, that most of my opportunities had come from her and from my own determination. She reminded them that gratitude cannot be demanded when love and fairness were missing in the first place. She also made it clear that my success belonged to me, and that no one had the right to claim or control it. The room went silent. My parents tried to interrupt at first, but she didn't let the conversation turn into another argument. She spoke with quiet authority, pointing out the years of imbalance and how unfair it was to expect me to fix problems I didn't create. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel alone in front of them. It didn't magically solve everything. My parents were still upset, but something shifted. The narrative that I was selfish suddenly lost its power when someone they respected challenged it openly. And after that meeting, I began to see my situation, and my future, in a completely different light. After that meeting with my grandmother, something inside me finally settled. For years I had carried this invisible weight, the need to prove that I wasn't selfish, that I was worthy, that I deserved space in my own family. Hearing someone speak the truth out loud lifted a pressure I didn't even realize I was still holding. The relationship with my parents didn't magically improve overnight. Conversations were shorter, sometimes awkward, sometimes tense. But for the first time, I stopped chasing their approval. Instead of trying to fix every misunderstanding, I focused on protecting my peace and maintaining healthy boundaries. Back at work and at home, life slowly returned to normal, or maybe a new version of normal. I redecorated parts of my house, invited close friends over more often, and started building routines that made me feel grounded. I also invested more time in friendships and relationships that were based on mutual respect instead of expectations. Therapy became a big step for me too. Talking openly about years of comparison and emotional neglect helped me understand how deeply it had shaped my self-image. I learned that being the backup child was never a reflection of my worth. It was simply a role someone else had placed on me. My grandmother and I grew even closer during this time. We had long conversations about resilience, independence, and forgiveness. Not the kind that erases the past, but the kind that frees you from carrying resentment forever. Meanwhile, my brother remained distant. We barely spoke, and while that hurt, I accepted that healing doesn't always mean reconciliation right away. And slowly, piece by piece, I began to realize that family isn't just about shared history. It's about respect, support, and the freedom to grow without being compared. But even as I found more peace, there were still lessons left to learn, and decisions to make about what kind of future I truly wanted for myself. As the months passed, I realized that healing wasn't just about surviving one big conflict. It was about consistently protecting the life I had built. My parents would still occasionally try to pull me back into old roles. Subtle comments about responsibility, reminders about family duty, or quiet pressure to help my brother again. But this time I responded differently. Instead of long emotional debates, I kept my boundaries clear and simple. I decided what topics I was comfortable discussing and which ones were off-limits, especially finances and my personal decisions. When conversations started drifting toward guilt or comparison, I calmly changed the subject or ended the call. It felt strange at first, almost unnatural after years of over-explaining myself, but it also felt incredibly freeing. I also made a conscious effort to build a support system outside my family. Friends, mentors, coworkers, people who saw me for who I was without old labels attached. That circle reminded me daily that healthy relationships don't require constant self-defense. One of the hardest steps was redefining my relationship with my brother. I stopped trying to fix things or carry responsibility for his choices. Instead, I focused on being respectful but distant, allowing space for accountability on his side. It wasn't about punishment, it was about protecting my own emotional well-being. My parents didn't fully understand my new boundaries at first. There were moments of tension and even silence between us. But gradually, they began to realize that I wasn't going to return to the old dynamic, the one where my worth was measured against someone else's potential. And while our relationship remained complicated, I finally felt in control of my own story. By that point, I wasn't just surviving family conflict anymore. I was shaping a future defined by my own values. And that realization led me to some of the most important reflections of my life. Looking back on everything, the comparisons, the rumors, the conflicts, I started to see patterns I had never fully noticed before. For years I thought my role in the family defined who I was. I believed that being the backup child meant I was less capable, less deserving, less important. But distance and healing helped me realize that those labels were never mine to carry. One of the biggest lessons was understanding that success doesn't erase pain, but it does give you the power to rewrite your narrative. Buying my own home, building a career, surviving the rumors, none of that magically fixed my past. What it did was show me that I had strength long before anyone acknowledged it. I also learned that fairness isn't always something you receive. Sometimes it's something you create by choosing healthier boundaries. Waiting for my parents to suddenly change had kept me stuck for years. Accepting that they might never fully see things the way I do allowed me to stop chasing impossible validation. Forgiveness became a complicated topic too. I realized forgiveness doesn't mean pretending nothing happened or allowing people to repeat the same patterns. For me, it meant letting go of constant anger so I could focus on building a peaceful life. Some relationships became more distant, but they also became less painful once I stopped expecting them to be something they weren't. Most importantly, I finally understood my own value outside of comparison. My journey wasn't smaller just because someone else was treated as the golden child. If anything, surviving everything I went through made my achievements more meaningful, because they were built on resilience, not approval. By the time I reached that point, I felt ready to close one chapter of my life. Not with bitterness but with clarity. And with that clarity came a desire to share what I had learned, hoping that someone else in a similar situation might feel a little less alone. If you've read this far, thank you. Writing everything out forced me to see my life from a different perspective. Not just as a series of painful events, but as proof that people can grow beyond the roles they were assigned in childhood. For a long time, I thought love had to be earned through perfection. I thought if I worked harder, achieved more, or sacrificed enough, my parents would finally treat me the same way they treated my brother. The truth is harder to accept. Sometimes people don't change just because you become successful. And that realization hurts, but it can also be freeing. One thing I want anyone in a similar situation to understand is that your worth is not defined by how loudly someone else praises your sibling, or how often you're overlooked. Being underestimated doesn't make you weak. It often means you learn to survive without constant validation, and that builds a quiet kind of strength. Boundaries were the hardest lesson for me. Saying no to my parents' demands felt terrifying at first. I worried I would be seen as cold or ungrateful forever. But over time I realized that protecting my mental and emotional space wasn't selfish. It was necessary. And the people who truly respect you will eventually learn to respect your limits too. I also learned to choose my own support system. Family doesn't always mean safety, but friends, mentors, and people who genuinely celebrate your success can become the family you need. My coworkers, my boss, and especially my grandmother reminded me what healthy encouragement looks like. If you feel like the backup child, here's what I wish someone had told me earlier. Your story is not finished just because someone underestimated you. A success is meaningful when it comes from your own goals, not from proving others wrong. It's okay to step back from relationships that constantly make you feel small. And most importantly, you are allowed to build a life where you feel respected, valued, and at peace. Today my life isn't perfect, but it's mine. My home is a safe place. My career reflects my hard work. And I no longer measure my value against someone else's expectations. If sharing my story helps even one person feel less alone or more confident in setting boundaries, then every difficult chapter had some kind of purpose. Thanks for reading.